We go. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Rochelle.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day in Texas. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm okay. I'm making it. These chats have been a bit onerous, but I'm making it. So I hear Texas has the. Well, let me start first. Please tell us your name.
My name is Tranae Felicien.
Okay, and can you share a little bit about you so that we can get to know you and have this conversation?
So I was born in St. Lucia in the Caribbean and moved up to America when I was 4 with my family. Since then, Texas has been my permanent residence. I went to Texas A&M University, majored in political science, sociology, did some semesters abroad and away, and those were amazing. Then between law school and undergrad, I took a year to work as a project manager in an investments and consulting section of a survey group. And that was an interesting digression from what my actual goal was, which was law school. So I applied based on some personal circumstances that happened that year that showed me that I needed to enter law school and get in this profession of being able to help people. And I applied to Duke and other schools, chose Duke ultimately. Now I'm a rising 2L.
Okay. So I understand from what I see on the news, Texas is dealing with some pretty intense cases of COVID. How do you see that? How does that look to you in the community where you are? Is that near you, or is that something that's concerning to you?
It's concerning to me, definitely. I'm in Dallas County, so that is one of the hot spots, though not like Houston. I have been pretty good at social distancing and wearing my mask and really monitoring who I come into contact with. But I do have many friends and acquaintances who are not taking things that seriously. And that's more concerning, knowing that some of the people that I may come into contact with are not treating this time with the same seriousness that I am. But I'm just hopeful that people listen to the orders of our governor and wearing masks and being more responsible now.
Yeah. And so are you coming back to school this fall, or are you going to do remote learning?
I will likely sign up for all online classes, but I am moving back to Durham in August.
And what type of law will you practice?
So that's the question of the day. I applied to law school thinking that I wanted to be that progressive prosecutor that would have the agency to give lenient sentences and well, actually no sentences for nonviolent offenders and things like that. I got that idea in my mind in high school, and that continued for a while. But I've done a lot more research, and I've spoken to some ADAs and just realized how little discretion ADAs have, especially when the laws are laws. You can't go against the laws if there are minimum sentences. So it's been a little bit tricky to try to figure out where I want to go with my law degree. Right now I'm interning for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Houston, and I'm working in their human rights division, working on child pornography cases, human trafficking, police misconduct, and civil rights violations. And that work is very much more palatable to me. I am enjoying it. So I think I might take that path in working on human rights on the criminal side.
Okay, that makes good sense. And just in the spectrum of law as a whole, how diverse is law as a discipline?
I would say it's not that diverse in multiple dimensions. there are many organizations that I've been introduced to that are minority run.
Mhm.
But then when I enter the spaces like law school or like big law firms and various other organizations, it's still very much majority white and underrepresentation of many of the minority groups. And then even then, there's the whole intersectional play when you look at the various wealth
Mhm.
of people who enter law. Law school is very expensive.
Mhm.
So I've also noticed that many of the people who claim the minority groups also come from more affluent families.
Right.
I mean, I come from a very comfortable family, and I also understand there's a bit of privilege in that when I'm looking at taking out loans, it seems more feasible to me to pay them off.
Yeah, that very, very good point. Um, so why did you pick Duke over some of the other places where you were accepted?
So that's actually a funny story. Duke didn't make my shortlist the first time around. I applied to 5 schools, and then Duke sent me an email saying that I would have an answer within 10 business days. So I, at that time, suffered from really bad imposter syndrome, and I had only applied to T14 schools, which is a very bold choice if you have imposter syndrome. So I saw that email and applied on a whim, thinking that if I can get into Duke, then I don't need to apply to other schools
Mhm.
because that will bode well. And I got in,
Mhm.
started doing more research, and realized that the goals that I came into law school with, not just finding the job that I had been planning for, but being equipped to help others out and to help people that look like me out.
Mhm.
I realized that Duke had a very serious mindset when it comes to training on legal skills,
Mhm.
training in the doctrinal classes, and it's also a pretty collegial community when it comes to the way they teach law. There were other schools I applied to that were more cutthroat internally, which I didn't think was necessary for legal education. Uh, so I went to Admitted Students Weekend, met a lot of the Balsa community here, spoke to various faculty members who sold me on the school, and I put in the deposit that weekend.
Mhm. And has it been the best decision you made in terms for your career?
It's been a pretty good one. I don't know if I can say best because I still do love my undergraduate institution a lot.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's been a pretty good one. Many of the things that I came here for turned out to be true, which means that it was a good investment.
Excellent. So um, you saw the video of Mr. Floyd death?
So I saw the first part of it. I remember I was on Twitter that day. Someone had retweeted it onto my timeline. And when I realized what it was, I couldn't keep watching. By then, I'd already seen the video death of Ahmaud Arbery and others in the past, but I had reached my limit with Ahmaud's death. So I have not seen the full video all the way through. I've seen the photos. I've read many articles that talk about what happened, but I can't.
Can't watch the whole thing. Why do you think his death has sparked so much interest in police brutality, Black lives? Why do you think it sparked the kind of interest that seems to be here now?
That is a really good question. And I think it's multiple factors. One, the length of the video. Watching someone die for 8 minutes is not something that happens on a regular basis. You know, when people die in TV shows, it's a quick thing. If someone die, if you're at the bedside of someone that's dying, that's more impactful than that quick TV death, because you feel a connection and then you're agonizing through it. And watching 8 minutes and 46 seconds of someone dying is absolutely ridiculous, but also rare. And then I think another factor is he wasn't the first within that month. Within 30 days, there were multiple people. There was the video of Ahmaud Arbery, and it was just like a powder keg waiting to blow. People are at home. They have more time to keep up with what's going on. And even now, with all the protests that are still going on, I can't help but think that if it wasn't in the time of a pandemic, when we've scaled back social interactions and work interactions, these protests wouldn't be going on for so long.
That's a very, very good point. Do you think that the protest and these statues coming down and listening sessions and conversations from administrators will result in real change, or do you think this is just one of those things where we've had a moment in time and people are paying attention to, so that's why say things that make people feel good, but are we really going to do anything different?
I honestly don't know. I want to be optimistic, but I also recognize that I can only work with what I've seen in the past and what I've read in history. Mm-hmm. I think there will be some changes that come out of it. I don't think people would rest if no changes came out of it. Mm-hmm. But I still remember the last time we had protests near this nature, which was with Michael Brown and Ferguson. That was a completely different time. I remember me being in Texas, still beating that drum, wanting justice, talking about police brutality, talking about racism that I'd experienced, my family, the studies, all of that. And I remember doing that largely alone. Besides the other Black people I knew, there weren't many white people standing alongside with us, at least in my sphere. And so this time around, it's encouraging to me to see more white people entering this discussion and being uncomfortable. But even then, I don't know if that will result in the kind of change that we need and that we want to see. And even then, there are these different spheres of my life. So there's the work that Duke Law is doing. There's the work that churches are doing. There's the work that communities are doing. And then there's the federal work. And it's not to say that everyone is working with the same goodwill or working with the same determination. But then when you talk about the experience of being Black, all these spheres impact how you live in your day-to-day. So you could be really upset about what's happening in Congress with dueling bills and the likelihood of nothing getting changed because of the hyper-partisanship that's going on right now. But then it's like, if other parts of your life are also not doing well at implementing changes, then that compounds on the hopelessness. So where I am right now is just wanting better, trying to keep people honest and to communicate more, knowing that this time still hasn't passed where we can push for real change. But at the end of the day, if things don't change, it's not through the fault of Black people who have been saying these things for decades, centuries in this country.
So I want to come back to that, but I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think of when you hear all lives matter?
It's just pure ignorance, honestly. That when I think of all lives matter, it's infuriating, because that tells me that someone has never done the work to do a simple Google search to understand what someone else is saying. Mm-hmm. And they want to rest on what they heard on Fox News or was shared on Facebook. think that Black people are saying Black lives should exceed the lives of white lives. And it's just ignorance. And there's really no excuse for it. The fact that I still see that in this month, when there's been a massive campaign to help people understand what's going on and provide them with free knowledge, it's the height of arrogance and ignorance.
So, okay, so All Lives Matter is one of those things that we're trying to adjust to, people pushing back on the thought that Black lives matter. So, as a Black woman, what does it mean to you to be a Black woman in the space that you are in? You said you're coming from a comfortable family, you've got all of these things. What does it mean to be a Black woman? And what are the hopes for Black women from your lens?
To me, being a Black woman has manifested in different ways. I found myself taking on a lot of roles that I didn't expect. There's the conversations within the Black community that I won't focus on there, of like what Black women are asked to do and the lack of protection that they get even within the Black community. But then within the white community, there's this dueling perception that can come out of a Black woman saying something about what's going on. She's aggressive, she's angry, she needs to calm down. Like maybe she's speaking with passion and it's like, chill out. But then there's also this aspect of wanting a Black woman to be a source of comfort, and going to the Black women to satisfy their own desire to be seen as not racist. And that's what I've seen in my life, is I've seen people get very uncomfortable in my presence just because I speak with passion. Because for people who know me, they know, like, I don't curse. I'm not gonna yell at people like that. I really believe in the reasoning with people. I really pride myself on being reasonable. So then when I see people react in certain ways to my presence, or I have to justify my presence in a room, or someone wants to comment on my looks and say that I'm beautiful for a Black woman. And it's just, there's so much that's thrown at Black women, and it's constant adjustment and flexibility to move through this world and continue hoping and continue being joyful and continue being thankful when there's always something. Like, even this past week, I was visiting a friend who had been responsible in the last few weeks. And her grandmother lives at her house, and she's suffering from dementia. And I don't hold this against her grandmother, but she made a comment about my skin, of just saying, like, I don't hate anything about your skin. I'm forgetting the correct quote, but my friend was so apologetic having to deal with that. And it's not to say that I'm upset at her grandmother or things like that, but it's always having these constant slights for either my gender or my race, and then having to deal with that in a way that's productive, in a way that is constructive, and it's not hurting my mental health. And you're right, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman.
So Malcolm X said that in 1963, this is what he said, that the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman, the most unprotected person in America is the Black woman, and the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. Does those words still ring true in 2020?
Oh, definitely. There's so many studies that look at what happens within Black communities, and then they use data cuts by gender. And so when you look at the mortality rates of Black females. If you look at the criminal justice system, when it comes to sentencing disparities, if a Black woman is a victim, and you see so many examples. But it's also been interesting from my perspective because I am international. I wasn't born in America. While my family does share the history of slavery, because we're Caribbean and the slave trade extended there as well, it was interesting to come to a country and realize that people would then take the history, the collective history of Black Americans in America, and then throw it on me. And at first I was just like, that's so unfair. I'm like, I'm not African American. I'm St. Lucian American. But then I realized it was just people looking at me and saying, and being like, this is a Black woman. And especially when my accent left, then there was no differentiator there. And I've come to realize that there wasn't need for a differentiator. That's just how America is. They look at skin and attribute things to that, and look at gender and attribute things. But the Black female experience really is something that I think more people are paying lip service to now, but not actually making changes that help Black women.
Yeah, I think that you're very young and you've got a long way to go, but I'm pretty old, and I can tell you that in 2020, Malcolm X's words ring so true for me even to this day. You know, some of the things that we were talking about earlier, you know, these things that the university has been doing, the country's been doing, you know, whatever it is. And I'm going to read something to you. I can find it. I posted this morning, but I'm going to read this to you, and I'm going to leave out some information so we don't cause this person any harm, but I want to read this to you. I am an alum and a current faculty member. Coming to my university as a Black student and faculty member is a lonely experience. While I was a student, I had my fellow students tell me to my face that I did not deserve to be at my university. They had already decided the only reason I was at my university was because I was Black. It didn't matter that I'd earned my way into the university the same way they did. It didn't matter that I earned a merit-based scholarship to attend. It didn't matter that I had chosen to attend this university over other Ivy League institutions. It only mattered to them that I was Black. And that meant I couldn't have earned my way into this university. The worst part was these were not random people. These were people who up until then, I believe, were my friends. Being Black at this university is demoralizing. It means every accomplishment that you have achieved is worthless. As a Black faculty member at this university, I feel isolated. At UNC, they have a Black faculty caucus. Where's that at this university? If it exists, I have been unable to connect to it. And if it does exist, why is it in the shadows while UNC is public? I challenge you to answer these questions and to reflect on what it means to be a Black faculty member on this campus. As a Black alum, I feel undervalued. Perhaps this stems from my experience as a student, but I don't feel like I'm a part of this university's community. Since graduating, I have lived relatively close to this campus, but I seldom visit prior to joining the faculty. The only alumni event I ever participated in was my 10-year reunion, and I only did that for about an hour. I remember the message from the alumni weekend 2 weeks ago was, "Welcome back, Black alumni and Black alliances." I did not feel welcome. I joked with a faculty member, friend of mine from another university, that it felt more like an invitation to a lynching party than an alumni reception. In retrospect, this statement may be a bit hyperbolic, but I share it with you to give you a sense of how I felt returning to my alma mater and to give you a sense of why I have visited so seldomly. I remember the image that was used at the announcement. It was a painting entitled "Light is Easy to Love." I think that sums up my Black experience at this university perfectly: isolated and alone. A current Black faculty wrote that last week to me. And Black faculty now, not a Black student, not a Black administrator, but a Black faculty. And I read that almost every single day. I pick it up and read it. sometimes I just feel like crying, because how could this person who, from the way she describes herself, she's brilliant, you know, she got a merit, not a needs based, but a merit scholarship to attend, and feels isolated and alone, worthless, you know. How do we overcome those kinds of things? How do we, you know, I know you guys have been talking to various leaders at the university, but if that's the feeling of a Black faculty, what do you think it will mean for Black students at our university? What will be that outcome if that's the way a Black faculty person feels?
Well, to answer that question, if Black faculty feels that way, then there are likely many Black students that feel that way. And I would say I even feel that way to a certain extent. Um, and maybe where my perspective changes is I've always been in primarily white spaces. Dallas Fort Worth area, primarily white space. My high school was still primarily white. My undergrad was. And with those experiences kind of comes the rationalization of saying, if I'm going to be happy in my life, I need to find a way to not let things get to me as much. But things slip through, because I know in my undergraduate experience, I spent multiple semesters away from campus in my last 2 years because I was just tired of being there. I was tired of being questioned as to why I got into A&M or why I got a merit scholarship, even though my grades were stellar. My qualifications were stellar, and no one examined the impact of legacy or donations in getting into universities. And that's my biggest thing with all the people that want to criticize affirmative action, is that legacy admissions and admissions tied to knowing a faculty member, being related to one, or having someone who donates in your name,
Mm-hmm.
that brings more students into the university than what affirmative action does for people of color. And even then, affirmative action studies showed that it benefits more people from white rural areas than minorities. So reading through those studies and finding data that backed up what I thought about this being an unfair generalization just made me angry, to be completely honest. And so in undergrad, I reflected and then left to bigger cities,
Mm-hmm.
left to do different things, to go study abroad, to intern abroad, all of that. But in law school, I definitely see that as well, where people are questioning whether you should be in the room or how much seriousness they should give to the comments you make in class. And then the surprise, if you make a good comment or you're well spoken. And so it's disheartening to hear that a Black faculty member had that experience. It's more so disheartening to know that some of the things she said about being a student and being part of the community is also reflected by current students and recent alumni.
Yeah. And I think that in a lot of ways we are still struggling in ways that most people don't understand. So as you said, merit smart student, very, very, very personable, charming, and of course you're cute for a Black girl. Don't forget that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I don't even know what that means, but I'm like, okay, what does that mean? That most Black people aren't cute? What do you extrapolate from that sentence? Or I have Black friends. What do you extrapolate from that sentence? What is it that you're telling me? Because I don't. It doesn't resonate my brain what you're saying to me. But I think that my hope is, and I am not optimistic. I am not optimistic that all that we are doing right now will result in change that is really valuable for Black and brown communities. I believe that it is a moment in time where people are paying attention. The minute this pandemic goes away and there's less television time, there's less news time, less time to chat about these things, we'll go right back to where we were. Because, you know, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were black and white protests and looting and burning and all of these things. And when Malcolm X, same thing, we had all these different outrage about killing of black leaders, killing of black people. And each one sparked something, but the spark was not enough to burn the whole house down. It just was a spark. And so it is going to be your generation, your children's generation, and their children's generation that may bring about change. Someone said something to me a few weeks ago. It is going to take every baby boomer to die, and probably the baby boomers' children to die, to break the cycle of systemic and institutional racism. Because these things are taught at home. If you leave children alone, they don't develop racist thoughts and practices unless it is something that is taught somewhere by someone who is important or an authority to them. And so I hope that, you know, the optimism that you feel, the conversations you're having, the tasks that you're taking on does lead to change. But I'll add one more piece to this for you. When you make the changes for students, when you make the changes for faculty, don't forget their staff. So when you walk around your building, who's mopping and cleaning the bathrooms and cleaning the floors? Who's cooking the food? Who is it? You know, so when you make change, you need to make change for all, not one. So we're singling out, well, we're going to do this for students, or we're going to do this for faculty. We need to do it for all the people, because there's that old saying, well, when they came for me, there was no one there, because, you know, so we need to have this to be a universal change that brings everybody up, as opposed to bringing just a few, you know. So you can have your Tiger Woods and your Oprah Winfrey's and all these other people, but unless you get everybody else on that same stage, they're by themselves. And O.J. Simpson is a perfect example of that, right? So somebody who had achieved great success, and he made one misstep. If he made the misstep, I don't know, I can't judge that, but if he made the misstep, forever he is doomed to whatever it is. How many black athletes have you seen destroyed? You know, Plexico Burress, he shot himself. He didn't shoot any, he shot himself, wiped off the planet, you know. I mean, and when other groups have these misfortunes, these missteps, they're given chance after chance after chance. That's why we have the president that we have, because how many missteps has he had? And yet still someone thought he was good enough to be the president of the United States.
Yeah, that's real. Failing up, that's not a concept for people who are minorities. It's not a concept for Black people. And that's why when your friend made that comment about saying that baby boomers and their children need to die for systemic racism to end, I don't necessarily buy that, because of the nature of racism and it getting taught in homes. And people not realizing that just because you don't go to the hanging tree and pose by a body, that doesn't make you less racist than the people who do. And that doesn't make you less racist than people who wear Klan hoods. You might just be less violent, but that's not less racist if you're still growing up with this ideology to expect violence from Black people, to expect lower intelligence from Black people, to expect all these negatives from Black people. And then it's even worse if you get a countering opinion or someone that defies stereotypes, and then you just say, well, they're not Black. And I got that a lot growing up. The whole thing of, she's not Black, she's Caribbean. And as a justification, I guess, in their mind of me exceeding their expectations. And so I would say that even people my age and younger are still growing up with the same racist mentalities, which is why it gets harder to make the conversations about what racism is if they still associate it with lynching and slavery. racism spawned those things, but it also spawns the mass incarceration that we have, the lack of second chances. I mean, one of my dad's favorite shows is American Greed. And it just shows how many mainly white people, I honestly have not seen a show with a Black person, but I'll say mainly white people to be accurate. How many mainly white people can go into communities where they know no one, maybe have one person vouch for them, and then they set up a pyramid scheme, or they set up this money laundering program, sorry. And then they're not prosecuted to the certain extent that someone who just has a drug problem has. They have literally ruined lives. Like, Bernie Madoff is an exception when it comes to the prosecution that he experienced. But there have been multiple people highlighted in the show that ruin the lives of hundreds or thousands of people. And yet someone who just has a little marijuana on them is getting more jail time than them. And someone who is Black and brown, because when you look at the disparity in policing, and you see how when you have these broad statutes criminalizing social issues that affect the races pretty much equally according to studies, but then with discretion, the police are going into Black and brown communities and locking them up and disrupting families, then people my age, if they don't understand all the history and studies that I'm pulling from based on my own studies and sociology, then they look at that and they're just like, well, the problem with the Black community is the lack of nuclear families, or the fact that so many people are in jail, or the fact that so many people aren't aspiring to better jobs. And it's like, this is a complex issue and there's agency questions that you can ask. But if people have been beating along this invisible ceiling for so long and they're disproportionately represented in everything negative, you have to be honest with yourself and ask, is it because they're predisposed, or is it because there's some other societal ill going on? And people say these things without the introspection and honesty to ask themselves that. Because if you come down to they're predisposed, you have taken the racism of maybe your parents or maybe your grandparents or society, and you've internalized that. And then if you say there's systemic problems, you have to help with the change. There's no sitting on the sidelines here.
I agree with you completely. I'll just add one thing to what you just said. So crack, people who sold or did crack got mass incarcerations, like not just, 3 or 4 years for the addiction or whatever they're selling or whatever it is. And now we have meth and the opioid crisis, and now it's a mental illness. It's not the same thing. And even when you think about that and just in practical numbers. So crack was primarily ravaging the Black community, while now meth and opioids are ravaging the white community. They have nicer terms for what's going on with their people than with our people. So I'm really grateful for this time to talk. Once this video is converted, I'll send you a copy so you can see it and tell me if I can upload it. But I appreciate this, and continue to do the hard work. Continue to do the hard work. Continue to do the hard work, because it's so important that we need this to be done. And I ask you, to think about it universally, not just what's best for students, but what's best for faculty, what's best for the staff, what's best for that whole institution. Because if you only pick apart a part, when they get finished fixing you, and in your 3 years you're gone, what's left behind? What's left behind? So do your work, and I am very grateful that you took this time out to talk to me, and I'm very, very appreciative of that. So thank you very much for that. And
thank you, Rochelle, and thank you for this time, just being able to talk through things and your reflection. Definitely, the work we're doing is intersectional, broad-reaching, because we also understand that Duke has responsibilities to Durham, to its staff, to its faculty, and not just its students.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that very much. So when the video is converted, I will send it to you so you can tell me if I can upload it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes, have a good day.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.